and welcome to the 92nd Street Y. I'm Seth Pinsky, the CEO of this amazing institution. Thank you for joining us both online and in person for tonight's special event as we kick off the second season of the Dialogue Project. Tonight, we turn to a vital topic: universities in the crosshairs. As a new academic year begins, higher education finds itself under unprecedented scrutiny and attack. Campus culture wars dominate the headlines, while government pressure continues to mount. Critics, from conservative media to federal authorities and others, argue that elite universities have been captured by progressive ideology, eroding the very foundations of higher education. Are they right? And is this the start of much needed reform? Or are they wrong? And are we in danger of destroying higher education as we have known it? We're fortunate to have two titans of American academia with us tonight to examine these questions that are among the most urgent of our time. Before we get started with tonight's program, we hope that you'll participate in our conversation by answering a poll question relating to our topic that can be accessed via your phones. You can find the question using the QR code on the card that you were handed when you entered the hall, or by going to the web address that you should see on the screen if you're joining us online. The code is also here on our screen. For tonight's poll, we're asking the following: is the ideological culture at universities one-sided? After you've heard tonight's conversation, we're going to ask you to vote again on the same question to see if you and your fellow audience members were swayed by what you heard. If you have questions for our panelists during tonight's event, please submit them via the same QR code and web address. As always, we will try to get to as many questions as possible. Now, a little bit about the Dialogue Project. The series grew out of a feeling I think many Americans share, that increasingly we are unable or unwilling to understand the perspectives of the other side of the political divide. This is because many of us live on our own information islands, shaped by the media we consume and the people with whom we speak and associate. Through the Dialogue Project, our goal is to respond to this corrosive phenomenon, bringing urgent and controversial issues to the stage with experts who disagree, asking them to engage with one another in a structured, civil conversation that informs, challenges, and perhaps even reshapes long-held beliefs. We aim to model what it looks like to debate across differences, not by avoiding hard conversations, but by having them with honesty, curiosity, and importantly, respect. Hopefully, in the process, reminding each of us that it's possible to hear perspectives with which we might disagree without coming to metaphorical or even actual blows, something that not long ago was second nature to nearly all of us. Last season, the Dialogue Project explored topics such as income inequality, immigration, America's role in the world, and education reform. All of these conversations were thought-provoking and enlightening, and to our surprise, in several cases, members of our audience were even swayed by what they heard. As you listen to tonight's conversation, we hope you will keep a similarly open mind. We also hope you'll join us for future installments of the Dialogue Project, including our next event on October 23rd, when we'll take up the topic of transgender athletes in sports and what constitutes fair play. Tonight, we're pleased to have Robert Costa as our moderator. Robert is a national correspondent for CBS Sunday Morning and is the chief Washington analyst for CBS News. His work includes political coverage, in-depth interviews with newsmakers, and features on culture, literature, and the arts. Prior to CBS, Robert was a longtime national political reporter at the Washington Post, and in 2021, he and Bob Woodward co-authored Peril, a New York Times #1 bestseller. Please welcome welcome, Robert Costa.
good evening. I appreciate you all being here. It's an honor to be back at the 92nd Street Y, and many thanks to Seth and his team for the invitation to moderate. And we are really lucky tonight to have two titans of higher education to consider not only this question, but really the stakes that are facing higher education at this moment, at this crossroads for the country and for so many institutions. And just briefly about our two participants tonight who are acclaimed leaders in higher education for decades. We have President Emeritus of Columbia, Lee Bollinger, who led the university, as many of you know, from 2002 to 2023. That was the longest tenure of any modern era president in the Ivy League. He has long been an advocate for free expression and free speech. He has a book that's very much people are looking forward to reading come January of next year, called University, A Reckoning. But beyond his work at Columbia, he has had an amazing life. He was from California, grew up partly in Oregon, went to undergrad at Oregon, came to Columbia for law school, and was a clerk on the U.S. Supreme Court, understands the law at the highest level. And while he is so known for leading Columbia for a long time, he was also president of the University of Michigan, and he understands, we may have some Wolverines in the room here, he understands the challenges facing not only those in the Ivy League, but those beyond in places in the middle of the country. And he is a face many of you know from journalism. He is a longtime member of the Pulitzer Board and a chair there, often presenting the Pulitzer Prizes at Columbia University. So we're very lucky to have the President Emeritus, President Bollinger, with us tonight. And joining him will be the former Treasury Secretary of the United States, Lawrence Summers, Larry Summers, as many of you know him, who was also, of course, president of Harvard University. President Emeritus Bollinger remains a university professor at Columbia, and Secretary Summers remains a professor at Harvard. We just interviewed him a few months ago at Sunday Morning, and he has been a very thoughtful, outspoken voice among the different issues facing higher education. Beyond his work in the Clinton cabinet at the highest level, as Treasury Secretary, he worked as a top economic advisor for President Obama. He was also chief economist of the World Bank, and he really not only teaches now, but he was one of the youngest tenured professors in Harvard's history. And so these are two gentlemen who are leaders, and I'm really looking forward to hearing their thoughts tonight. Please give them a warm welcome. I think your microphones are on your chairs. You can find it. Well, we really appreciate you both being here tonight. We know how busy you both are, and we're going to get into many issues tonight, but I thought we'd begin, President Bollinger, with this question, a reflection on your perspective about universities and answering the question the 92nd Street Y is posing to its those gathered here tonight and those online. What's your perspective on that question? Is the ideological culture at universities one-sided? And we know your answers it's not about a debate tonight, it's about a dialogue and seeing how you interact with that and engage with it from your life experience and your own position.
Great, thank you. It's wonderful to be here. I'll go directly to the question and say that I want to answer it yes, and I also want to answer it no. The problem is that I believe, as I know Larry does because we've talked about this a lot, that there are insufficient diverse viewpoints at universities in many fields. This is something that is always true, but I think it's true especially today. So I believe that there should be more viewpoints in various fields. There is also a question about not just viewpoints, but the level of tolerance, the level of a kind of scholarly temperament, I like to say, which is an open-mindedness to different ideas than the ones that you're holding, a kind of willingness to entertain all different points of view that are expressed. I'm also concerned about a level of intolerance that characterizes university life. Okay, I want to make those points very clear in my beliefs about them. The problem is when you talk about this, you're in a world in which the ways in which this has been politicized really create very, very severe problems, not only for universities, but for democracy. When I was president, I remember there was really a lot of concern, and properly so, about people who would be invited to give lectures or people who would be invited to give commencement addresses. And those speakers would be denounced and stopped from being able to speak, and commencement speakers were told that they shouldn't come, and eventually those were terrible violations of academic freedom, of free speech on campuses. There's no question that those were really terrible incidents. The problem is they were highlighted to such a degree that it created the impression of far more intolerance than in fact exists. This is now a pretext. It's not just a kind of innocent exaggeration of what happens on campuses. Many, many controversial speakers come on campus, far more than the incidents where there's intolerance. But this is now a pretext for really trying to crush universities. And the current administration is on a path that is deeply destructive of the role of higher education in America, which I think is one of the great, great achievements of America, but also doing this with other institutions, law firms, the media, corporations, even the rule of law. So what we have is a problem on American campuses, no question about it. But it is exaggerated for political purposes and has now been seized for authoritarian ends that are deeply, deeply troubling, and we don't want to miss the forest for the trees as we talk about this.
Secretary Summers.
It would probably be more entertaining if Lee and I had large disagreements, but on this point, we don't. No sin or error of universities remotely justifies the oppressive extortion in which the Trump administration has been engaged. There has been no due process. There has been no targeting of the penalties to the alleged sins. There has been overreach massively in terms of the government's asserted rights to control what takes place in universities. It is unconscionable. I am proud that Harvard has recognized that with its $50 billion endowment, with its unprecedented network of alumni and its reputation, that it has come to the view that if it can't resist the oppression, who can? And so I am proud of the positions that it has taken and gratified by the judicial support that they have received. That said, I do think, as I thought 2 years ago and as I thought 20 years ago, that the problem of imbalance on university campuses is a serious one for many fields. It doesn't matter for the teaching of chemistry. It doesn't matter for the teaching of mathematics. It doesn't matter for the teaching of marketing in the business school. It doesn't matter for the teaching of anatomy in the medical school. And so it's important to recognize that there are an important subset of fields where this is important, but not all fields. That said, my feeling when I was in Washington, working with President Clinton and President Obama, was that my views put me on the 40-yard line of the left of center, but not by that much. Those same views in the context of Harvard put me on the 10-yard line of the right. And that is, I think, a substantial issue. To put it bluntly, their midgets are better represented in the NBA than Republicans are in the humanities. And that is a substantial issue. I don't think it is primarily because of some kind of discrimination. It has to do with who chooses to be an academic. It has to do with the nature of these fields. But I think universities can do much more to platform a wide range of viewpoints. And I think universities in particular can do much more to stop their prestige being arrogated by individual faculty members or individual administrators who take strong politicized position in ways that appear to the rest of the world to be positions of the university. And I don't think we've done as good a job of controlling that as we could have.
President Bollinger, Secretary Summers made a characterization of the scholarship, generally speaking, on university campuses. Do you have a different take on the evolution of scholarship, broadly speaking, at American universities?
Well, I mean, Larry has posed the issue very well and starkly. We want to make this problem as complex as we possibly can, not a binary choice between is there too little viewpoint diversity and so on. So I would offer this thought. In my career, I've been in law schools, my whole life, and been university-wide for over a quarter century. I have seen many, many intellectual movements. In law, there was a long period, in which the main thing to do was to write treatises about the state of contract law in every single jurisdiction in the country. That was rejected as pedestrian, not the work of major intellectuals. Then came the work of theorizing about law. That wasn't sufficient. Then we went into the period of law and economics that Larry knows so well. That was reviewed as insufficient, and it became law and interdisciplinary broadly. We had race theory, we had critical legal studies, we had feminist theory. I mean, there are movements within fields. And when that happens, there is a kind of aggregation of intellectual focus. I was dean of the law school at Michigan. I thought, boy, a young person coming in could be fantastic in the area of water law. Nobody was doing water law, incredibly important. And I would say to the person, you can teach water law and be famous instantly. And the person would say, I don't want to do that. I want to do constitutional law or federal courts, the areas where the great minds were already working. There is a kind of natural, as I put it, aggregation of intellectual work that happens in life. I think Larry's not quite right on these fields that really it's not a question of Republican or Democrat, but I know from physics departments. Columbia had the greatest physics department in the world, and I was told once that the problem was the great figures in the department believed that a particular area of physics was the only area worth studying, and that meant the department missed the next era of physics. So this kind of focus that happens, I think, is a natural phenomena, not to be disparaged. So I want to put in a complication about how to think about intellectual work And if I had more time, I would talk about what does it mean when it comes to liberal viewpoints versus conservative viewpoints as measured on the spectrum of American politics. But I do think my main point is that the ebb and flow of intellectual work has to be understood to deal with this question of is there too much ideological bias in universities at this point? Larry?
Lee, I think you're too gentle.
Too gentle?
Too gentle
Yeah.
with the problem.
Yeah.
I agree with you that we should avoid oversimplifying to binaries, but I don't agree with you that we should make it as complicated as possible. Because I actually think some of this is fairly straightforward. Take an example. There's a field called American Studies. It brings together history and literature and a little bit the softer social sciences and political science. It exists as a major at most major American universities. There is people typically are in do American studies, and then they do some other discipline. There is a journal of the American Studies Association, a professional journal of the field of American studies. An exercise was recently done in which the articles from the last 5 years were classified. When I was shown the classification criteria, I thought they were slightly biased towards being positive. But there were 3 categories. This is an article that is basically highlighting America's weaknesses and flaws. This is an article that is neutral. This is an article that is positive and points out in some way America's exceptionalism. The audit revealed that there were 92 articles over the 5-year period. 76 of them were negative.
Critical, right.
16 of them were neutral, and 0 of them were positive. Now, that isn't just that it's kind of a fashion for a few years. That's the way that field has been for a very long time. And it's a deeper thing. I was the first Ivy League president to attend an ROTC commissioning ceremony in 30 years. 30 years. Now, I hated the former gays in the military policy as much as anybody else did. But my view was that we were institutional citizens of the United States, and that when we took the position, as most Ivy League schools did and as the nation's law schools did collectively, that the federal government of the United States could not interview on the campus for people in the military because it was discriminatory, and so for the same reason that a law firm that only hired white people wouldn't be allowed to interview on the campus, the people who defended the United States could not be on the campus. I thought it was outrageous. I thought it was wrong. I thought it was an institutional statement that had been approved by the trustees of all of these universities and had lived with, and I thought the public was completely right to find it to be an outrageous kind of abdication of responsibility. And I could give more examples of where it wasn't just some intellectual fashion in some field. So I think this is a larger issue than referring to intellectual fashion suggests.
I feel like I need to disclose here, Secretary Summers, I was an American Studies major.
But you were positive about America, right?
But could you engage with his point here?
Yeah, sure, I'd be happy.
Is there a problem intellectually
Right.
institutionally, if you have an American Studies journal that doesn't have a positive article about the United States
Yeah,
government.
on that one, I mean, I'm with you, Larry, on so many things. And I was, the president of Columbia who moved to bring back ROTC to the campus. So on the other one, I'm not with you on that one. But I'm surprised, actually, that because I think where we really agree is there are not enough conservative voices of a scholarly kind, not just conservative voices. You and I don't care really about people's viewpoints or opinions. We care about, is there scholarship that represents the range of sort of issues that the world is grappling with. And I think you and I agree completely that if you go to law schools, if you go to anthropology departments or English departments, you're not going to find that full range, and that's a problem. But I'm not troubled that so many articles of the American Studies would be critical. I think that it's like asking a journalist, I mean, why aren't you more positive about America? It's just the nature of the beast is to try to be better, to try to be critical. But let me pose this question to you, Larry, because the University of Chicago economics departments and programs and associated sort of disciplines in yours and my lifetime had a particular way of thinking about economics, and free market economics became it was the center of modern free market economics for many, many years and even decades, and had a profound effect on the shaping of public policy. I always thought, University of Chicago had a particular intellectual bent on economics. And that was okay because it was a thriving intellectual environment. It came up with really, really important ideas. And even though the range of economic thought was much broader, as long as the university system as a whole had that, we were in good shape. The university system as a whole probably did not have that broad perspective. I'm talking about your field, so you're going to have to educate me and the audience on this. But isn't that an example of a kind of intellectual narrowness that was?
So I think it's fine that UMass has an economics department that's focused entirely on Marxism, or largely on Marxism. I think that's fine. I don't think every university needs to fully represent every viewpoint. And I think it's probably helpful for there to be some departments of physics that are focused on theoretical physics and others that are focused on experimental physics. I think it's appropriate that that happen. I think, though, when all the leading schools are on the same side, you have a pretty serious kind of problem. I think if you actually looked, and I know something about this, the University of Chicago did a better job in its economics department of explaining what Keynesians thought, even though they didn't think it, than anybody in American Studies at Harvard did of explaining why some people thought America was an exceptional nation and a beacon to the world, which was kind of, it was described to me. I asked somebody, tell me about American Studies. Tell me what American Studies is. I'll never forget the answer. It's a holding company for ethnic studies departments that focus on grievance of particular ethnic groups. That was the description that I was given of what it was at Harvard University. And that just seemed to me to not be right. And I take your point completely that there's criticism and I understand that the newspaper isn't supposed to run stories saying Secretary of Treasury went to his office and was conscientious and thought reasonably today. I get.
We know you would like that.
Really, I get it. That's not what journalists are supposed to do. But I would have thought, and correct me if you think I'm wrong, I would have thought the fact that somehow this country that people came to hundreds of years ago became in some way a superpower. It had the longest lasting democracy in the history of the world, that it attracted immigrants from every continent who wanted to come, that it fostered universities that were the envy of the world. I would have thought that if a field was called American Studies, that some sliver of the contemplation that took place in its journals would be about that.
But look,
and that
yeah,
for lots of our fellow Americans who like celebrate July 4th and salute the flag and stuff, it would be pretty offensive that that didn't happen and that they were kind of right.
yeah, except that criticism can be a way of loving the country in itself. I mean, when people write about constitutional law, which is, of course, my field, and you're trying to have the world, the country, live up to the ideals of the Constitution. I mean, let's take racial inequality and discrimination and so on. You're critical of the country, but of the issues. But that doesn't mean you
I defy you to read the Journal of the American Studies Association and defend the idea that these were constructive criticisms in the spirit of love and admiration for America.
Right.
I defy you to look anybody in the eye and offer that defense.
If only we had somebody here who had been an American Studies major, maybe he could explain to us how that works. But I just want to say one thing, Larry. I mean, what you said about Chicago is really interesting to me, because what you said is not only were they the paragon of scholarship on free market economics, laissez-faire economics, but they were also able to articulate and sort of, be intellectually open to an opposing kind of perspective, a Keynesian perspective, which says a lot, because one of the things we want to be asking about universities is not line up how many Republicans and Democrats you have on your faculty, line up how many, quote, conservative scholars and you have in your faculty and how many liberal-oriented scholars, but is the intellectual work representative of the range of ideas that we want scholarship to pursue? And that's it's taken us to a more complex point in understanding the question than are universities too ideologically one-sided.
So I completely agree with you that any idea that we should try to have a certain number of Democrats and a certain number of Republicans on the faculty, or that we should have ideological litmus tests, I agree with you that that is a bad idea. I will say that I was struck many years ago and have continued to be struck. I haven't really observed it one way or the other in the last 5 to 10 years, that the Federalist Society, which way conservative, they've staffed the federal judiciary with all kinds of people whose views I loathe, when they have programs, they always have people like me on the programs who are on the other side. And it has not been my observation that so-called activist scholars, which is now a very fashionable thing in a large number of fields, represent that. Gary Becker was an economist at the University of Chicago. His Nobel Prize was won substantially for economic theories of discrimination. My own view would be, as I'm sure yours would be, that his theories captured one aspect of the phenomenon and not the whole aspect of the phenomenon. But you could look for a very long time at any ethnic studies department, extensive curriculum on discrimination without finding a single mention of the perspective that he represented. So I do think that, John Stuart Mill has this famous passage that you probably know because it's all about the First Amendment. And I don't remember exactly how to say it, but the basic idea was that the great thing about encountering strongly critical views to your own was that it enabled you to defend your own views better and more forcefully and more intelligently. And I just don't think that in a variety of fields in the modern university, we do a very good job of that. I'll give you another example from Harvard. Somebody invited Charles Murray to speak. I don't agree with some significant number of Charles Murray's views, but when the dean of our faculty, whose capacity for statistical research was, shall we say, limited at the time, chose to denounce him as a pseudo-scholar, that was sending a very important kind of signal. And there are a lot of incidents of that kind that take place. And so God knows I don't want to give aid and comfort to the view of the Trump administration, but I have to say that I think for over the last 20 years, universities have not done a very good job of recognizing these problems.
Secretary Summers has brought up this point. You said originally in your opening remarks that you believe so much of this is often a case of episodes being highlighted too much, whether it's by Secretary Summers or by the press. Is there any response you have briefly to how scholarship broadly is not characterized in the same way?
So look, I love universities. I think they're glorious institutions. They're made up of human beings, and there's going to always be, given human nature, there's always going to be some intolerance. There's always going to be some closed-mindedness. I mean, we're talking about matters of degree, I think, here, and in generalities. And I'm prepared to say that I think there is work to be done in universities, especially in some fields, on those. However, every single day I go in and teach my class, I try as hard as I can to get students to think about every point of view on this. And the thrilling part of teaching is when you take students and you go up one side of an argument, and at that top point you think there's no possible alternative argument. And then you go the other route and you find the same feeling. I know Larry does this in his classes. I believe that a huge percentage of university faculty do that. So I am really worried that the criticism, which I'm prepared to accede to, especially at the level of generality we're talking about, is a problem, but it's also a major problem to criticize universities.
Let's just pause here for 1 second. We've been talking a lot about scholarship, which is very important, but so much of the anger that's out there toward Ivy League universities, towards major universities, comes from 2023 and what we saw with Hamas and the attack on Israel and the reaction on university campuses. Anti-Semitism has been cited by the Trump administration as part of the reason it's targeting these universities and how the universities are handling this issue. How do you reckon, we'll start with Secretary Summers, with this issue? Where is the truth, in your view, about the reality of what's happening on campus, and how should university leaders handle it?
So I'll answer it in 1 second. I just want to say that polls at Harvard, and I don't think they're very different in any of the other leading schools, are that 60–70% of students feel uncomfortable expressing certain views. So if this was just a kind of episodic thing that happened in some classrooms and all that, you wouldn't have 2/3 of the people feeling chilled. And that's why I think this is a pretty pervasive problem. Look, I think here's the deep problem, and it's a very profound difficulty. What Lisa, one of the world's great First Amendment scholars, I'm not, but because these issues are important, I've learned a little bit. And one of the things that I've learned is that First Amendment protects racist speech, and the First Amendment protects anti-Semitic speech. We might say it shouldn't, but that is the American tradition. And therefore, there's a very difficult problem. You can't say we're committed to academic freedom in the First Amendment sense and also say we're not going to have any anti-Semitic speech or any racist speech, because those are inconsistent. So what can you do? I think there are two major things that you can do, that universities mostly do with respect to racist speech or misogynist speech, which is when the speech goes beyond speech to be active disruption, physically threatening people, shouting down speakers, occupying public spaces in ways that interfere with others, you can act firmly and with resolve to punish and prevent that from happening, not feed burritos into the windows of protesting students, as was done on a number of campuses. That's one thing you can do. And the second thing you can do is academic freedom does not include freedom from criticism. And when significant parts of the community say things that are profoundly immoral, wrong, and offensive, you shouldn't punish them. You can't do that if you want to say you're for free speech, but you sure can call it out and recognize it. And the failure has been a failure to do that in the way that universities routinely do with respect to racist or misogynist speech. So the answer is, what wasn't done in the ways it should have been done and should be done is, number one, enforce a set of rules about time, place, and manner and preventing threats and so forth. And the other is call out and reject as wrong and as absolutely not speaking for the university when that happens. When the dean of the Harvard Divinity School, speaking at a convocation, declared and treated in parallel the Holocaust and the founding of Israel, which was labeled as the Nakba, that was flat out wrong. And that should not have been allowed. That should have been called out. That should not have been criticized. She had a right. She had a right to speak freely in her own personal capacity. She did not have a right to speak as the leader of a major community at a major academic convocation where attendance was required and speak in that kind of political and offensive way. So there's a lot that can be done, that should be done, and was not done. Now, none of that justifies what the Trump administration has done and the approach that they have taken, but no one should think or be satisfied or think there has been a symmetric standard in the way our leading universities have addressed anti-Semitism and racism.
So Larry has described the framework absolutely right. I would just add some thoughts. So first of all, public universities are bound by the First Amendment. They can't make a choice. Private universities can choose. Harvard, Columbia can say, we don't want hate speech, we don't want anti-Semitic speech, we don't. But over the decades, private universities, for good reasons, I think, have said we're going to live by the First Amendment when it comes to public debate about public issues. Not in the classroom, not in scholarship. I mean, we censor people all the time. We give them grades for bad, stupid ideas and so on. But when it comes to debate about public issues in the university context, we say we're going to follow the First Amendment. One of the problems with that is the following. The First Amendment is, it's counterintuitive. It's not something you just wake up and say, I'm a First Amendment person. You have to learn to live with really terrible ideas. That's part of what the First Amendment has been about. And as Larry said, racist speech, anti-Semitic speech, sexist speech, and so on, protected. So if on a university campus you're going to live by that, one of the first things you have to do is explain to people why it is that you're going to live by that. There's a rich tradition in the First Amendment about that question, just how far should it go, what speech should be protected, how extreme should we go. And this is really complicated and difficult for people to understand. So a university needs to start by explaining why we have free speech. And you could also change it if you wanted to, as I said, in private universities, but you should explain what it is if you embrace that. The second is that universities, like many parts of the country, are caught flat-footed in two ways: by not having disciplinary procedures that are really robust for incidents where there's no longer free speech, but this has moved into the realm of punishable action. And that was a problem for many institutions. I have to say, while I was president of Columbia, I did not take on the disciplinary process and reform it as I wish I had. For a variety of reasons, it just wasn't worth doing it. But the failure to have adequate disciplinary procedures was a serious lapse. And this third point is really right. First Amendment only works if you have a center, if you have values, if you have people who are prepared to step forward in the chaotic debate and discussion and expression that free speech has, and to condemn speech, to censor in other ways than official censorship, and to reestablish the values and morals that define a good institution and a good life. And I think that that did not happen with sufficient vigor.
Any thoughts on that?
So we agree exactly on private universities choose or not forced to have the First Amendment. We agree that discipline has been highly, highly problematic. I think we agree on standing up for some moral rightness. If a professor at your university, who is a professor, say, of Mideast studies, says Israel deserved what happened in October of 2023, and the people who died deserved to die grim deaths because they were accomplices of immorality. If a professor who teaches hundreds of students takes out an ad in the New York Times saying that, what response is appropriate? And my view is the response that's appropriate is to say, painful as it is, Professor X has the right to express his opinion. And I, as president of this university, have the right to express my opinion that his opinion is depraved, immoral, not representative of the university, and odious.
So I agree completely, Larry.
And that is done when professors say racist things, and it is never done when professors say anti-Semitic things.
Hold on, that's too. I did that. I did that. You did that. Other people have done that. I mean, Larry, I am with you on the insufficient response of, I don't know, university leaders. I don't want to say that exactly. Universities to anti-Semitism that was exhibited, but I can't agree that it has never happened because I did exactly that.
In the wake of October 2023,
Yeah,
the number of statements that were explicitly called out.
I understand.
As to, can you identify any university president in the wake of what happened who called out the members of their Middle East Studies department who cheered for what had happened as odious, depraved, wrong, or anything similar? Just one example. Do you have any?
I don't, and I agree with you completely. I just don't want that to be, representative of all time. So it was, I agree with you.
I salute what you did years ago, well before October.
With BDS.
Before October.
Yeah, and I was not president then.
And BDS, and even with respect to BDS, the vast majority of anti-BDS statements say we shouldn't use the endowment as a tool of policy or something.
Yeah.
They don't say BDS has special overtones of being problematic.
I have said that.
Because it's singling out the Jewish state.
I
I
understand.
salute you for having said it, but if we look across the Ivy League, we will find almost no parallel statements of that. And that's why there is such strong feelings around this. But I salute completely what you said.
We'll go to some audience questions for a moment. Why don't all schools join together to fight President Trump's interference? This is how they're characterizing it, instead of allowing him to attack each school.
So I think that this is a fundamental problem, but it's not just universities. It's also, why didn't law firms join together? Why didn't media join together? Why hadn't there been a much more united, across even those fields, together? And I think we're waiting for that moment, and hopefully it will happen from my point of view. Why it hasn't happened. Universities, when I was president of Michigan and we were sued, and I was sued personally for affirmative action it became very clear to me at the beginning that if Michigan were the only party defending this, that Michigan would lose. Getting other universities to join in and support that was not easy. I was reminded always of a famous quote from Learned Hand, a great judge, that the last thing in the world you ever want to be is a defendant in a lawsuit, because everybody else runs from you. The last thing they want to do is help. It takes a lot of work, a lot of time. I think people were caught unawares. This was a surprise. I think there were new presidents who had not had a lot of experience. But the kind of centrifugal forces that exist when you're attacked were really profound. And I think unfortunately there just hasn't been the efforts to overcome that. So it's not I think we're still waiting for it.
We've talked about this a little bit before in our conversations. University presidents used to be on the cover of Time magazine, used to drive cultural and political conversation. Where are the university presidents today? It's not just a question, as this person has asked, about banding together, but their capital in this country. Where is it?
So I think some of it has to do with what I've been describing, when university presidents have presided over saying that the military can't recruit on their campuses, when university presidents are presiding over institutions and can't bring themselves to criticize the people who are praising Hamas. The universities have fallen quite far out of a kind of mainstream where there is a constituency to hear what university presidents are saying and their messages. I think that is an important part of what the answer is. I think it's also probably true that we tend to remember a set of golden old days, and we can think over a sort of 40-year period of 3 or 4 examples of when a university president made a strong statement, and then we think there should be 3 or 4 such statements every year. So I think it was not always quite as wonderful as you're describing it as being, but I think there is a real and deep question about the ways in which universities and university presidents do or do not see themselves as institutional citizens of the United States. And I think there's one final thing that is actually very important, which is, and this is a big debate in higher education, and I've been at different points in my life on different sides of it in my views, which is, yeah, wouldn't it be great if university presidents were speaking more on issues of the day? That's one view. Another view is, gosh, a university is a community of scholars, and nobody should speak for all the scholars in it. And if the president who's in charge of deciding which professors get tenure and which professor doesn't get tenure starts expressing opinions on controversial issues, that's going to chill what a lot of other people do. That's the idea behind the so-called Calvin principles at the University of Chicago. And the current fashion is pretty far towards the view that, except on higher education related issues, university presidents should stay out of politics. And I actually have considerable sympathy with that outside of issues that bear very directly on higher education.
This is a very, very complicated area, and I won't add to what Larry has said on that. I think there's another dimension here. I think a lot of universities feel, this goes back to the beginning of the conversation that we were having, Larry and I were having, if universities are perceived as bastions of liberal political viewpoint, and that's now the public kind of perception, universities find it dangerous to step out into the political arena because they'll immediately be cast as elitist and one-sided and discredited and so on. So they'll actually harm the very thing they're trying to address or think they might address. I think universities, something we haven't talked about, have suffered over time by becoming less in communication with the public than might have been the case. A lot of fields, the language is very arcane. It's very difficult for people who are outside fields to enter. Not enough effort has been made to take knowledge that's in universities and make sure that it gets out into the public realm. There is not an effort, as big an effort as might be the case, to make universities just more integrated into the lives of communities and states and the nation. And that has fed on this kind of, this is a place for only people who get in. It's not a public good. And I know the press has felt this kind of response too, when you're losing touch with the service that you're providing, the right of the public to know. And I think universities would do well to really spend a lot of time thinking about how to convince the public that the knowledge is for them.
Let's pause there for one moment. While we continue this conversation, the 92nd Street Y, as part of this dialogue project, likes to record the audience's views of this particular question we asked at the beginning of the program. So if you're able, watching online or on your phones here, to offer your perspective to the 92nd Street Y, it would be helpful for them and their project as they try to discern more on this front. As you're voting, I'd like to come back to what President Bollinger was saying. So often as a journalist, Secretary Summers, I'm encountering voters out in the country, American citizens, who bring up the issue of class, and they feel like elite universities somehow are not giving everyone a seat at the table. Can you reflect, as people are voting, on how universities might address that, even if it's not something you agree with as a view? How do they address that view that is out there in aspects of the country?
Look, I do agree with that. I didn't have nearly the staying power that Lee had. I was only a president for 5 years. But the thing I'm proudest of from those 5 years was instituting a set of policies where anybody who got into Harvard could come and pay zero if their family income was below $100,000. And the reason we instituted that policy was precisely to express the kind of concern that you're describing. Now, that having been said, I think there is a real question in the Ivy League that the way I like to put it is the Ivy League has an Augusta mentality after the golf club, which takes pride in how many people want to come and how few people get in, rather than a Coca-Cola mentality, which takes pride in how widely their product is disseminated. I think it's sad that the Ivy League has grown so much has grown in the world, and the size of Ivy League classes are either the same as they were 50 years ago as at Harvard, or 20% greater as they are at a few schools. And I think there should be much more provision for growth. And I think much more important than that is that we should be using all of what technology makes possible to bring our teaching approaches, our knowledge, our everything to people all over the world. I don't know, I would imagine Columbia has one, I don't know. Harvard has had for 150 years an extension school for working people in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where anybody can come and they can study at night and they can get a degree in extension studies. Today, with technology, we should be having extension schools to the whole world so we can touch the lives of much larger numbers of people. And I think there has been a way insufficiently inclusive mentality in our great universities, and I would rather see us spread that which we do best, which is educate, to much larger numbers of people than try to be larger voices in the public debate. I think if we want the government to leave us alone with our academic freedom, we need to be a little careful to leave the government alone with respect to our political advocacy. And so I would rather see us maximize our impact by spreading what we do educationally much more broadly.
So, and as a First Amendment person, I'd like to see more voices in the public realm, and I think people should be receptive to and understand the places where people are coming from. I think more voices, the better, and I think any policy of trying to suppress institution from speaking out on issues is a mistake. Columbia has a general studies program. It takes in students who haven't followed the normal path, and they're 30, 40 years old. They're veterans. Columbia has more veterans than all the other Ivy League institutions together. We set up a program for trying to bring academic work to communities. It's a wonderful program. The Ivy League is doing more things to try to deal with these issues than anybody realizes. The real problem in America, there's a perception problem, and there's more because of the kind of knowledge not being distributed, I think, as widely as it should be. But the real problem in America, from my point of view, and this comes from my time at Michigan and as president of Michigan, is the decline in public support. I mean financial support. So this has been going on since the 1970s as states have cut back on funding for this and for public universities, which of course are the that really is the backbone of higher education in America. And so the consequence of that is a steady rising of in-state tuition, taking more out-of-state students. One of the glories of American higher education is that the great public universities are as great as any private university. And having a system that is both public and private has enormous benefits for the country. But public universities have really struggled to maintain that competitive stance while declining state funding. So there are many, many forces that have brought us to this point.
The results from the 92nd Streetwise collection of your responses is available here. Is the ideological culture at universities one-sided? 59% before said yes. 41% said no. Afterward, this discussion, this was a nuanced discussion, a dialogue, and not more than a debate in any sense. But 76% say yes, 24% say no. Interesting data. We live in a time where data can be discussed and debated at length. Before we close tonight, we are gathered here at a very turbulent moment in the country. Institutions across the board are facing pressure for various reasons. Issues of trust, issues of funding. You two have had such accomplished careers, lives dedicated to service to the country, to universities. While you have your critics, I really would argue no one could say you have not dedicated yourselves both to serving others in the universities for so long. So if you could just end tonight, we'll begin with you, President Bollinger, and close with Secretary Summers. What are the stakes for higher education right now?
So one has to start, I think, with recognizing, acknowledging the greatness of the American higher education system. Larry and I are insiders. We're very, very critical. But the fact of the matter is, American colleges and universities are the envy of the world. People from all over the world want to come and study and be with people who work in these institutions. They are stunning places. If you spend a day on campus and walk around and visit classes and laboratories, you just can't possibly leave without being dazzled. It is an amazing fact that a significant percentage of some of the most talented people in every generation want to spend their lives doing research and teaching in American universities. The overwhelming majority of people who are faculty, who teach, adjuncts, and so on, are dedicated to the principles of scholarly work and of education. They are just amazing, amazing places. Right now, we are in a period where there are encroachments that are very, very serious, but they are not life-threatening. And the question will be, over the months and years ahead, just how much more pressure and efforts to try to control and literally destroy these institutions will we encounter. I don't know the answer to that, but I remain hopeful that the resilience of these places will be strong. But I am no longer prepared to be surprised by further acts of interventions that are intended to really destroy these great institutions?
Let me say three things. First, I'll tell a story that involves Lee's institution. The United States won the Cold War. It won the Cold War because the Soviet Union collapsed, because Mikhail Gorbachev caused it to collapse. The two key concepts that he did that ended the Cold War were perestroika and glasnost. People ask, where did those ideas come from? They came from a man who was his ideological advisor, a man named Alexander Yakovlev. They asked Alexander Yakovlev, who looked like a Soviet apparatchik, where did he get these ideas about transparency and freedom? And he said it all went back to the year I spent studying American history at Columbia in the late 1950s. Now, if American universities accomplished nothing else other than bringing down the Soviet Union, that would be enough to justify every penny that was spent on it. mRNA vaccine. The fact that we now cure 2/3 of cancer, and we used to cure 1/3 of cancer. The fact that we have the internet. The fact that we have artificial intelligence. The fact that we stabilize the economy much more effectively than we used to. All of that is the result of ideas that came out of American universities. And they are the envy of the world. It wouldn't happen today, I admit. But just 12 years ago, Xi Jinping decided to send his daughter to Harvard. That is an extraordinary, we're proud of it at Harvard, but it is he could have sent his daughter even to Columbia. That is an incredible thing. And yes, Lee's completely right. I could not agree more about the dangers of the overreach and the extortion and the authoritarianism and all that. It's completely right. But I think that's a little bit, for me, that's a bit too easy a note to end on, as right as it is. And I'd want to end on a different note. Why did this happen? Why is our country as divided as it is? Why was a president who is on the path we're on both elected and then reelected? It has to do with a kind of estrangement between elites and the remainder of the population, and a kind of disillusionment and distrust that the rest of the population has developed for elites. And we can say, we who are in positions of privilege can say they're wrong, that their tribunes are wrong, they don't understand, they're immoral, we're great. We can say all of that. But if so large a fraction of the population distrusts universities, as they now do, and if universities are the embodiment of elites at a moment of estrangement, I think that is also a moment when we should not just be mad and fight back and proud of all the things we have done, but we also are in need of a great deal of soul searching about our future and Lee and I are at a stage in life where it's not going to be us who provide the leadership on that, but I hope it's going to be some people in this room who are going to provide the leadership on that, because it's not all okay, and it is immensely important, and the choices that universities make are really crucial to the future of our country and the world.
Well, tonight was certainly, to use your phrase, Secretary Summers, a dialogue of soul-searching and contemplation of serious issues. And please give a warm round of applause to Secretary Summers and President Bollinger. And thank you all for coming tonight.